As I was fully engrossed in the project I was working on, my mobile phone rang at the most inopportune moment. I pulled it out of my pocket in annoyance and saw that the screen displayed an unfamiliar number, which I expected to be an annoying telemarketer. Without hesitation, the voice on the other end of the line said, "I'm so sorry, we've been disconnected, please hold Miss Peterson." I interrupted and told her, "Please inform Miss Peterson that I do not wish to speak to her today or at any other time." I then hung up and tried to focus on my work. A notification that a message had been received appeared on the screen, but I didn't check it. My plan of action was already in place, so I concentrated on putting everything in front of me in order, and my phone broke again, forcing me to switch it off. I spotted a pre-drilled hole in the horizontal baseboard and used a second pneumatic hammer to tap a long concrete nail along the baseboard. After making sure the job was perfectly done, I stepped back and admired the finished result alone in the dimly lit basement. My progress was minimal, but I quickly assembled the frame and had it hanging within 15 minutes. I breathed a sigh of relief as the previous tasks of laying the cable runs, wires and ventilation ducts had all been completed without incident, and thank goodness the plumbing was in place, so I had nothing to worry about tonight. It's amazing to think that in a few weeks I'll have the whole basement construction project finished. It's also amazing that I can only drink 1 packet of beer on the weekends now, but it wasn't that long ago that I was drinking 6 packets of beer as a warm-up before alcoholism. Thanks to Miss Peterson for helping me make a positive change. Miss Denise Peterson, my ex-wife. I'm trying to put those thoughts aside and focus on my work, and the sooner I get my work done, the sooner I can relax, have a drink, and hopefully avoid unpleasant dreams, which is my reality. It may not be an ideal way to live, but it's better than feeling like I'm dying every day. With these thoughts in mind, I began to prepare the boards for the next frame, one by one. Before I knew it, my quiet weekend was about to be interrupted by work, which, despite my best efforts to avoid it, I found myself wrapped up in emails and official business before the day even began, and sitting at the kitchen table, begrudgingly munching on my cereal, I realized that the seas I had hoped for would soon slip away. I went down to the basement, feeling fatigue pile up, ready to start installing insulation, put on a mask, turn on the portable radio, and drown out the sound of my own thoughts. I look out at the dreary November weather, the raindrops pattering on the window panes, and memories of the same rainy day last year come flooding back, adding a bittersweet tinge to the loneliness of the moment. As the door opened, I was greeted by the surprised look on my brother-in-law's face. Without waiting for an invitation, I strode confidently into the noisy house. In the midst of the jubilant atmosphere, my unexpected presence silenced the house. My 14-year-old son Brian stood in the doorway looking at Susan on the floor. My 17-year-old daughter quickly left the room. My wife broke free from the arms of a strange man who was holding her tightly, and despite her embarrassment she tried to dispel it by introducing me to Paul. I stood in the doorway, water still dripping from my Macintosh. "Oh, it's you. We weren't expecting you. When did you get here?" She seemed more interested in whatever was on her mother's wall and didn't turn to face me. Disappointed, I went back to the front door and went outside to hail a taxi. The work progressed quickly as I nailed the boards to the shelves and secured them to the shelves with my trusty claw hammer. Luckily, the boards with power sockets and vents fitted perfectly, and once everything was in place I was finally able to use the heating without any problems. I'm glad I was so well prepared because I only had a few boards and a couple of spare thin sets left. I moved them into the garage and stored them until I could bring them into the studio. After making sure I had power to each of the new outlets and enough airflow for the HVAC system, I started screwing on the outlet covers and vent hoses. This was in stark contrast to the bitter cold I experienced on my way back to O'Hare Airport after Thanksgiving. As I attempted to buy a ticket home, I felt physically and emotionally drained. I no longer cared about the cost. My marriage was beyond repair, and I was just waiting for it to officially end. I turned the radio to the sports station and listened to the game while I applied glue to the basement floor. I tried to apply the glue as evenly as I could across the entire floor, and although I had thought about custom oak parquet, I ended up thinking it was too expensive. I went back upstairs and started planning my next big project. I planned a quick floor restoration by sanding, lacquering, and varnishing. I made fresh coffee in the recently renovated kitchen, where bright fluorescent lighting illuminated the space and showcased the gleaming cutting-edge appliances. I enlarged the kitchen by removing a load-bearing wall, turning the small servants' dining room into a spacious modern kitchen, and enlarging the shelves in the pantry. I reluctantly attended the event at the insistence of my roommate. I found myself mingling in the crowd with a drink in my hand. Without hesitation, I slapped him across the face. I stepped between them to stop them from continuing to assault her, and despite all my efforts, he angrily tried to get close to her. Denise introduced herself to me, and I introduced myself to her, and we chatted for a while, after which she left, and I decided that I would never see her again. She asked me if I had any contraceptives and explained that she needed them to complete a task for new members of the sorority. The shock was evident on my face as she quickly clarified the situation, and all I could do was nod and blush as I reached for my wallet and handed her what she had asked for, something I had kept since 9th grade. I stood still and watched her beautiful figure disappear from my sight. A month later, as the campus was buzzing with excitement for the reunion, I was about to head back to my dorm when a familiar face appeared beside me. I had helped her at the pizza place and at her sorority recruitment fair, and now she needed me again, and confused, I asked her how I could help her this time, and she explained that she was supposed to go to the reunion with one of the guys from our fraternity, but it turned out he was a jerk. I don't think she realized I was joking. She told me about the sorority she lived in and the time of the party, and when I left I was confused about what had just happened. He pulled out a birth control kit and suggested I take my chances, but luck wasn't on my side that night. I spent the rest of the day getting to know Dennis as we chatted and ignored our football team's game. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should kiss her, but Denise made the decision for me, saying goodnight and leaving without kissing her, and when I returned to my room I couldn't help but feel that there was something wrong with me in her eyes. I called Denise several times over the next month, but the person on the other end said she wasn't in. I had heard that she had started seeing someone else. As I reached the end of the floor, I paused to admire how perfectly the tiles matched the paneling. I will celebrate the completion of the basement renovation before my work week begins. During these times, my main focus is on making money, and in the evenings I tackle small tasks around the house that don't require a full day off. This past week I spent my evenings delicately removing moldings and baseboards from all the rooms in the house. I had carefully noted every detail and had sanded them. All that was left was to sand the areas with the sander. When the phone rang I saw another call from Denise's office. I had received very few calls from her all week. I was busy studying in my dorm room when the phone rang and I assumed it was my roommate who usually answered my calls. Surprised, I asked who she was and she introduced herself as Denise. Annoyed and confused I replied that she had called me. Not me. Where do you think I am? I announced that I had arrived and then waited for a moment. I found Denise in the corridor. She seemed to be in the middle of a heated argument with a man. I was confused by her anger. I needed help. She screamed in desperation. Why don't you call your boyfriend? She followed me and sat down beside me. Her tone lightened as she began to speak. Look, I like you, but I'm not ready to commit to someone yet, so I'm trying to keep it a casual relationship, dating other guys. If our feelings are deep enough we'll both feel it. Can you live with that? She asked me. I doubted I could share her with anyone else, but when she kissed me I realized I was falling in love. But the rest of the time all I could do was agonize in my room imagining her with someone else. Months later we finally made love in her car. My feelings for her intensified no matter how hard I tried to convince her. When she told me the baby was mine it was as if time had stopped and my stomach ached. I saw the anticipation in her eyes and I knew what she wanted from me. Before I asked Denise to marry me, I had dreamed of getting a degree in history and then going to law school, which she still had 3 years of study ahead of her. But all of a sudden, everything changed, and after discussing every possible option, we decided to do the opposite. We'd have a small wedding, I'd go to work and pay for her to go to law school, and once she got a job, she'd provide for me while I got my MBA. She insisted on a prenuptial agreement to protect her house, which I would one day inherit from Dennis. Dennis was furious, but Grandma stood her ground, and in the end, Dennis reluctantly agreed to sign the prenup, and despite the tension, we had a peaceful wedding and began our life together. Despite the odds, I did everything I could to make ends meet, and we both graduated from college without incident. Denise gave birth to our daughter, Susan, and was accepted into law school, and her mother proudly hung graduation and baby pictures all over the house, but I noticed that I wasn't in any of them. My determination paid off when I got my broker's license and started trading stocks under the guidance of a veteran broker. As my skills improved, so did my income. I soon realized that no matter how many times I was promoted, my savings remained at the same level. 3-year-olds I had to bite my tongue when Denise or her mother complained, but I understood how important it was for Denise to realize her dreams, so I bravely continued to be a mainstay for her, and I continued to support her when she devoted her time to small group study. Some of my classmates disapproved of my goals and laughed at me in front of Denise, and as much as I wanted to argue with them, I restrained myself in order to remain calm. Finally, the long-awaited day came. The exams were over and Denise found herself third in her group. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride come over me as she confidently walked across the stage at the prom. I hugged her baby and she introduced me to many of her classmates with a blissful face before heading off to the prom. It wasn't until 10 in the morning that she came home and admitted to staying with her friends after she had had too much to drink. I couldn't help objecting that she should have called me for a ride, which led to a heated argument that ended with our children in tears. If studying in law school took a lot of effort, preparing for the bar exam was a real ordeal. Dennis passed the bar exam perfectly with the highest score and quickly landed a high-paying corporate job in Dallas. After our success, we decided to move, and I planned to pursue a bachelor's degree, but Denise convinced me to postpone my studies so we could focus on building up our savings while she worked on becoming a partner in her firm. I trusted her opinion and agreed to wait because I realized it was necessary to build a solid foundation for our future. After learning about a brokerage firm in Dallas, I decided to start working there. In the end, I became the only one who had to cover rent, car payments, household expenses, student loans, and all the other financial burdens. Denise, on the other hand, seemed to only care about herself, and every time I tried to discuss her salary or finances, she would throw a fit, and to this day, I have no idea where her money went after 10 years. After 10 years in Dallas, Denise moved from corporate headquarters to Atlanta, and I had the idea of renovating the old house I inherited when my grandmother passed away, but Denise wasn't supportive of the idea, claiming the dilapidated house was similar to the Addams family mansion, and I assured her that the Victorian would be easy to renovate within her budget. Denise found a house at a very high price, and despite my request that she consider it, she reluctantly made up her mind. I signed up for a house in an area I didn't like and paid dues to a country club I wasn't interested in. I changed jobs at a brokerage firm and once again found myself at the bottom of the social ladder, unable to make ends meet and barely covering our monthly expenses. The tension between us was affecting our marriage, and she began to demean me in front of the kids. The turning point came when our house began to collapse and the homeowners association demanded costly repairs that I couldn't afford. I dreaded meeting with Denise and felt on the verge of a breakdown. A recent review of my work confirmed that I had exhausted my earning potential, so I was at a dead end with no opportunity for growth. Despite my misgivings, I sat down with Denise again to discuss our financial predicament. Reluctantly, I showed her my job review, which I was embarrassed by, and once again she looked down on me, confirming that her mother's negative opinion of me had been correct all along. The next day she offered me a solution. She suggested that she and the children stay with her mother while I stayed to solve the problems I had created. I knew that even with the advantages, I could do some good. I was saddened that the children were not saddened to be separated from me. On the contrary, they were happy to move to Chicago where they would be pampered by their grandmother. They rejected my plans and made a series of harsh conditions that I had to meet. Despite the temporary respite I got from my family's departure, I was still struggling to make ends meet. I started doing simple jobs that didn't require special knowledge or skills, then more complicated jobs, and it seemed that for every job I did, there were 2 more, and I began to resent the endless cycle of expenses. As time went on and the winter holidays approached, I contacted Denise in hopes that she would come home so we could be together as a family. Denise hinted that her family was out of town for Thanksgiving, so there was no reason for me to visit her. She handed the phone to Susan, who said the family was planning to get together at her grandmother's house and she couldn't wait to see her cousins. When I decided to go to Chicago, I found answers to questions I hadn't even thought about before, like how easily I could be replaced. 2 weeks after Susan's birthday, I received a large envelope in the mail from Manila containing Susan's official request to Cook County to change her name from Susan Malone to Susan Starling. It was accompanied by a written statement from Denise Mullen and Paul Starling in which they stated that they had begun an intimate relationship while in college and had continued it in law school. It became clear to me that a similar revelation awaited me when Brian turned 18. Shortly thereafter, Denise called to inquire about the status of the package she had sent me. 20 years earlier, when I had hung up the phone, she had handed me the divorce papers, and despite the fact that she had been paid more, she did not believe that I should have a fair share of our property, insisting on keeping the property that belonged to her and arguing that the property that belonged to me should remain mine, and that despite the fact that she had never made a financial investment in real estate, that she still expects to get 50% of the value of the property when it is sold, when in fact I lost $400,000. As I focus on the floor, I notice that I have finished sanding and polishing the floor and it is now ready to be painted and varnished. Wanting to do another big project and continue to explore options, I set my sights on the master bedroom balcony, which overlooks the expansive backyard, and that's when inspiration struck. Excitement mounted as I thought about the research and permits required for such a project. I imagined working in the backyard all summer long, imagining different sizes and styles of pools and estimating the possible costs as I listened. I heard the sound of an engine running and voices of discontent. I couldn't observe what was happening from my seat, so I quickly walked to the bedroom overlooking the street and, looking down, I saw a rented U-Haul trailer trying to pull out of the backyard with a trailer in tow. The trailer was backed up on the wet grass, its wheels spinning helplessly, and without hesitation I rushed out and knocked on the driver's window, which surprised him. When I offered to help her, she nodded gratefully and accepted my help. I handed her the umbrella and she quickly took the children to a safe place under the porch. I had to drive through most of her yard in order to get there, but at that moment, it seemed like the easiest solution. Eventually, I managed to get the truck and trailer outside and was ready to try driving a car with a trailer again, a skill that many people never master. I carefully drove the trailer up the driveway until the truck and trailer were parked and ready to be unloaded. Then I turned off the engine and hunched my way into the rain all the way to the front porch, where the kids were applauding and the blonde angel was all smiles. I was happy to help my neighbors. My name is Mark Malone and I guess you are our new neighbors. I added, feeling rude for not introducing myself sooner. My name is Jenny Harris and these two troublemakers are Cam and Billy. I laughed at their antics and was glad the tension had passed. I joked that I hoped they would help her unload the truck as the truck and trailer looked very heavy. A flash of sadness crossed her face and she replied, "No, they helped me load the truck. There are only 3 of us who will be unloading the truck, but I appreciate your willingness to help. I can always call my friends for help if it's too difficult." Jenny told me that I needed to switch on the power. I told her to sit down and then went outside to contact a friend who worked for an energy company. He remembers that he was ordered to come here to install electricity and had to leave as per company rules because no one was home. He planned to come back again on Monday afternoon, and now that there was a new occupant in the house he would make sure to install the meter and switch on the lights. She thanked me and the kids clapped happily again. I unlocked the trailer and began to move the boxes into the dimly lit front room. It was a rainy day, and Jenny helped carry the light boxes into the house, while the 2 kids watched from the porch, as they playfully argued over who would sleep in their room first. When we finished unloading the stuff on the trailer, my friend JN drove up in his company truck. I'll admit that we were still working on the trailer and hadn't even moved the truck yet, but without a word, Jana walked over to the trailer, picked up the boxes and started moving them inside. I wondered how she got a house in the area, but before I could ask, new guests arrived, friends with spouses and kids, adults with pizza and beer, kids with soda. My friends and I toured the house, the kids chased each other around and discussed design ideas, boxes were unpacked, things were put into rooms, furniture was placed, beds were assembled, and finally the living room was decorated, which marked the completion of the unloading. I couldn't help but smile as I told him my PO concept, which sparked a lively discussion between us, with the other boys joining in with their suggestions. We exchanged a quick glance and then smiled at each other. As the party began to break up and the guests left, Jenny kindly allowed me to carry the sleeping boys to their beds, where she tucked them in before kissing them silently goodnight. I opened the bottle of wine and took a long sip. The cool liquid seeped down my throat. We just sat in silence, enjoying each other's company. "Mark, you're my hero," she finally spoke. "Thank you for everything you've done for us, Jenny." "I'm just trying to be a good neighbor, you don't have to thank me," I said. She shook her head. "Bollocks to that. If it wasn't for you, I'd still be stuck in the yard, in debt to you." "Sir," I giggled, "wait until you know me better." Due to her lack of driving experience, she had been repeatedly delayed at petrol stations, fast food outlets and hotels, often receiving abuse and angry comments from other drivers until she managed to get out of her predicament, and was now faced with the daunting task of taking the trucks across the country to make restitution. I gave her a reassuring pat on the shoulder to try and calm her down. I said, "I'll drive the truck." Jenny looked at me in shock. "I can't let you do that," she insisted. "You can't put your children through another trip like that." I reassured her, "I can handle it, don't worry." We continued to argue for a couple of hours until my logic finally went out the window and she reluctantly handed me all the lease papers. When she asked me when I was going to start the trip, I replied about 9. In the morning, when she asked me when I was going to start the trip, I replied about 9 a.m. She realized that it was still early and suggested that I say that then you should spend the night. I shook my head and refused her. She suddenly hugged me and kissed me on the cheek before disappearing into the house. Jenny nervously handed me a set of keys and an envelope with a $20 note, explaining that it was for petrol and bus tickets home. She asked me curiously when I would be back while I started the car and pulled the trailer into the driveway. "Hey Perry, what's new?" he asked as we shook hands. "Hi Perry, I'm here to help a friend return his truck," I explained and handed him the papers. Perry's expression changed as he studied the paperwork. This lease was supposed to be revolving. He said that the truck and trailer were supposed to be returned, but that something had changed and they needed to be rented one way, and that I was prepared to pay any additional fees for the change in conditions. I said that I would ask Perry to clarify the matter at the leasing office. 30 minutes later, I arrived home and was greeted by Kai and Billy, who were playing outside and who excitedly shouted, "Mr. Mark." As I got out of the taxi, Jenny appeared in the street in a panic. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw me and she asked me what had happened. "Don't tell me you've been in a car accident," she begged me. She looked disappointed and reminded me that when she rented the truck it was designed to be a round-trip haul and I had to return it. It may have been a little lie, but it solved the problem and didn't hurt anyone except the original renter of the truck. Jenny smiled when I handed her the check, indicating that the deal was done and you looked happy. I noticed that she was wearing dirty clothes and told her that she admitted that she had underestimated the difficulties facing the house. I assured her that she could always come to me for help if the situation became too complicated. After returning the envelope to her along with the money she had given me that morning, I returned to my house, and although I had lost half the morning, I soon finished painting the entire first floor and began work on the first. A knock on the door interrupted my musings and I found Jenny standing on the threshold, feeling uneasy. She thought there had been an accident with the plumbing and that there was a leak under the toilet, and she asked me for help. I put down my tools, got down on my knees and quickly shut off the water supply valve, then flushed the toilet and emptied the tank. As she stood in the doorway after me, I pretended not to notice her. I quickly disconnected the system from the plumbing and removed it from the bowl and, unsurprisingly, the wax ring was faulty, so I removed the remnants of the old wax ring and replaced it with a spare from my collection of repair supplies. Throughout the process, I explained each step to Jenny. I carefully placed the toilet on the flange and pressed down to ensure a firm seal. Then I had Jenny sit on the lid of the toilet so her weight would help hold the wax ring in place while I took care of securing the bolts to the flange screws. I turned on the tap again to check the flush, and this time there was no sudden flush, which made Jenny squeal with delight. I applied another coat of sealant to the bottom of the bowl, then washed my hands and cleaned myself up. She insisted that I wash it for you, and I jokingly reminded her that I would run around naked under the circumstances, which made her blush. She then offered to buy me a meal, but she didn't have a car and couldn't go to the grocery store, so she and the kids would have to rely on the delivery service. Seeing this, I offered to take them to dinner with me after a shower in the house. She hesitated, fearing that it would be an inconvenience for me, but I put her at ease and promised to be there at 6 p.m. to their home. Jenny was pleasantly surprised to find that I had bought booster seats for Kai and Billy. After arranging the children, I invited them to dine at a wonderful Italian restaurant. During the meal, I got to know my new neighbors a little better, and Kai and Billy shared their stories with me. Jenny looked adoringly at her children, reflecting the love that artists have strived to perpetuate throughout human history, and she noticed me looking at her and quickly turned her gaze back to me. She explained that the cause of her current situation was her brother, who was an engineer and would take her car to him when he returned from service abroad. In the meantime, they were planning to rent a car from tomorrow, and I was talking nonsense. I said, "Just borrow mine. I rarely drove anyway. I usually drove my truck." We argued until I finally convinced her that borrowing my car was the cheapest and quickest solution to her problem, the cheapest and quickest way, and by the time we got home, the kids were soon tired and asleep from the entertainment. When we got to her house, I carried Kay inside and Jenny unlocked the door. After putting Kay to bed, Jenny put her to bed. I went to get Billy. Jenny was already waiting for me to put her to bed. I couldn't help but miss raising a family. I tried to assure her that I was fine, but deep down I knew that I missed those times more than I could ever imagine. She sensed something had changed when I handed her the car keys, and she gently stroked my cheek with her other hand before standing on her tiptoes and kissing me softly on the lips. I switched off the computer and spent the rest of the day doing various chores around the house, including finally finishing the painting of the ground floor, which was a really productive day as the projects around the house continued to dwindle. When I returned, the table was laden with Southern-style fried chicken, and the aroma of freshly baked apple pie heralded the arrival of dinner. When a hearty slice of apple pie was placed in front of me, I couldn't resist eating my share and letting out a groan of contentment. The children reluctantly went to bed, and Jenny followed them up the stairs, and halfway there, she stopped and invited me to join her up there. I followed her example and lay down to read Billy a bedtime story while Jenny looked after Kay, and when the children were soon asleep, we quietly went downstairs where Jenny was making coffee. I replied that it was black coffee, which caused her to add cream to the cup and hand me a mug with a smile on her face. We went outside together on the porch swing. The November evening was surprisingly cozy, and as we enjoyed the hot coffee, our conversation turned to Kay and Billy. Eventually I talked about Susan and Brian, and as we continued to talk, I began to share my feelings about my family and personal life. She gently rested her head against my chest, comforting me, and I felt so relieved to be surrounded by someone who truly understood my pain, and in a soft, soothing voice, she told me about the reasons she had traveled so far away with her children. Once upon a time, Jenny lived a perfect life, had a happy childhood, was crowned prom queen. She married her high school sweetheart, and together they realized their dreams, started a family, and created a life. Luckily, their young children weren't involved in the mess, and divorce became a constant topic of conversation between Jenny and her husband. Then one night, a call from the police changed everything. A young woman died in a car accident, and Jenny's husband was found dead at the scene. As she deals with the aftermath, her family points the finger at Jenny. The dead girl's family blames her, and even to some extent herself. In addition, the late girl's family filed a lawsuit, which forced Jenny to file a counterclaim. Fate had brought her to my neighborhood, where she had invested all her savings in the purchase of a new home, hoping only to get a job offer in the school district, along with an inaccessible account and a hedge fund, which she had to use to pay for her own expenses until she unexpectedly started working. It was at this point that I expressed a desire to analyze her hedge fund account, believing that I could help her improve her stock portfolio, and without saying a word, she got up and disappeared into the house, only to return a few minutes later with a folder in her hand. She insisted that I keep the papers and return them to her the next evening. As we sat down for dinner, she kissed me one last night and then said goodbye to me, and when I got home, I immediately started checking her hedge fund accounts and quickly discovered the unethical actions the manager had taken to enrich herself. The next day, I was still reeling from the thought of Jenny's kiss. The next night, I had dinner at Jenny's again. When Jenny came downstairs, I had everything ready. She made another pot of coffee and asked me what my conclusion was. I told her that she had been lied to, but I assured her that I could help her. Meanwhile, I was working out the details. She came into the room and I decided to ask her what was bothering her. She assured me that everything was fine and that she trusted me, so I didn't ask her. She assured me that everything was fine and that she trusted me, so I didn't need to explain anything. Instead, she invited me to join her in the living room to relax, and we spent the rest of the evening chatting as the fire in the fireplace slowly died down. Despite the age difference, I was more comfortable with Jenny than I was with Denise. When I woke up, the first thing I did was deal with Jenny's financial situation. I immediately contacted her former agent and told him that she had been fired and that I would be taking over her accounts. At first, he was resistant, but when I hinted at the possibility of contacting the Securities and Exchange Commission, he quickly changed his mind, and a minute later I received confirmation of the adjustment to her account, which was, on balance, a success, and I decided to revisit her investment funds. At the end of the trading day, I refused to pay the brokerage commission. I was satisfied with the changes made and went to dinner in the next room with a sense of accomplishment. Our weekends were now spent walking around the city with Jenny and her kids instead of working on home improvement projects. While I honestly helped Jenny with her own home improvement project, her house was in just as bad of shape as mine was when I first started working on it, so my experience came in handy when we worked on problems together. As soon as the kids were asleep, Jenny asked me not to go too far because she was too shy to do more than that when the kids were around, and even though I came home with unfulfilled desires, it was enough for me to just hold her. I felt that Jenny would soon start asking him what he thought of me, so I decided to be honest with him. Ray, I want to be honest with you. I love Jenny with all my heart and intend to marry her when the time comes. I say this with all sincerity. From the first day you met, it was obvious that you were always there to help Jenny and the children, and she was very grateful to you. I believe that the two of you are destined to be together, but I want to make it clear to you that if you ever hurt her again like that sneaky man did, we are going to have a talk. After the meal, Billy and Kay took their relatives upstairs and Jenny and I chatted with Ree and his wife. Jenny and I locked fingers and headed for my bedroom. After the passion was wild and unforgettable, we continued to cuddle and reminisce about every second of happiness. I eagerly embraced her again while she playfully put on a new robe, then we went downstairs and rummaged through the fridge for something. I carefully picked her up and carried her upstairs so that she was lying on the bed, and as I looked at her in awe, I realized that I would do anything for her. In that moment I realized the difference between Denise and Jenny. The time of grief and endless work was over and it was finally time to get back into life. After bidding her goodnight and kissing her, we went to sleep. The months flew by until one sunny day the doorbell rang, and to my surprise Denise and her companion Paul Starling appeared at the door, followed by Susan and Brian. Denise made me a proposition and asked to speak to me. After closing the door, I stood still and waited, letting them go to worry about not inviting them into the house. Denise continued to date him, but it was clear that Paul would not leave her alone. Despite her attempts to distance herself from him, Denise was torn between her loyalty to me and her feelings for Paul as she tried to sort out her complicated emotions and make a decision, realizing that her choice would have an indelible impact on our lives. He insisted on a paternity test for the children, and it turned out they were really his. I understood why the children wanted to be with their biological father, even though I was disappointed. I stayed calm and silent as Denise explained her decision. That's why she was asking for half of the profits from the sale of the marital home, even though I had already made all the payments, but now it all boiled down to the fact that our family was moving to Atlanta in connection with her upcoming promotion. Denise was well aware that I had lost my job at the brokerage firm after the divorce and would be unable to provide the necessary care and maintenance of my grandmother's house. She offered to transfer ownership of the matrimonial home to me and assume the remainder of the mortgage, in addition to presenting a receipt for $100,000 in cash, and as she waved the check in front of me, I froze, and eventually her hand dropped and I fell silent. I greeted them politely, noting the triumphant smiles on their faces. I willingly recounted to my guests the elaborate measures I had taken to restore the entrance to its former splendor, and how I had meticulously repaired every detail. Susan's eyes widened in amazement as we entered the conservatory, where the magnificent Steinway grand piano took center stage, and her love of music overflowed as she gazed in awe at this beautiful instrument. The master bath was amazing, with a shower with multiple shower heads and a luxurious clawfoot tub decorated with gold leaf. I guided them through all the rooms until we came to my office, where I told the story of making mahogany panels and how I find furniture that fits perfectly with the interior, proudly displaying the rare first edition books neatly arranged in the bookcases, with Butters, my faithful golden retriever, wagging his tail on the couch next to me. Denise, who clearly had an aversion to dogs, looked on with disdain, and I waved my hand, ignoring her objections. Billy continued to talk excitedly about his visit to the Atlanta Aquarium. They described their day with gusto, and Billy said confidently, "But Dad, ours was much better." Dennis was stunned by the interruption, but I didn't explain anything. When Jenny walked into the room, 7 months pregnant, she exclaimed, "Oh my God, I didn't know you had company." I hastened to announce to these uninvited guests that they were not welcome and took them outside, telling them in no uncertain terms not to come back, and as they left I realized they had a million questions that would never be answered. This is a form of therapy for me. The other part of the therapy was my job. After working at a brokerage firm for a few years, I discovered many ways brokers could circumvent the firm's security measures and put the firm at risk. I took advantage of this trust by opening a fake business account and trading wildly with company funds, and by the end of the day I had thousands of dollars in profit in my account. I knew it was illegal for me to do this, but I knew how much money I was making for everyone, and I was happy with what I had done over the years. $000. This trend continued for a full week, and I had doubled or tripled the company's capital. With nearly 200, I decided to short a couple of overvalued tech stocks, which was perfect timing because I ended up making a 600% profit on each of them without having to worry about margin requirements. I turned around, told him flat out to go to hell, and promptly quit my job. For years I worked until I had amassed a sizable fortune, so I was well on my way to signing a property relationship agreement with Dennis. It wasn't until Jenny and I were happily married that I revealed the amount of my account to her, and when she heard the figure of $2 million she could barely speak, and when I told her that my fortune was just over $400 million she almost fainted. I made it clear to several of the senior partners that I was strongly opposed to Denise becoming a partner, especially given that she no longer had a valid license to practice law. This was due to the fact that Denise and Paul had tried to deceive me by forging my signature on the registration documents for the second mortgage with the bank that held the mortgage on our matrimonial home. But their plan failed because I am also the owner of the bank and ordered that I be personally notified of any suspicious activity on this account. I received a call from my good friend, the district attorney I supported in the last election, who told me that Dennis and Paul would be charged with forgery by the end of the conversation. I couldn't help but wonder if Dennis would choose to defend himself, or use the public defender's services, since it had recently been in the news that there was a Section 8 housing project for the poor next to my friend's homeowners association. I smiled myself when I saw the happiness and contentment on Jenny's face. Her smile lit up the room, and I knew this was going to be a special night. When Paul traded Denise for a young model, Denise and her children lost their livelihood because they didn't have time to get married. Denise and her children had been living in poverty. They chased the good life, but fate was not meant to be. Now they were in loan trouble. They took turns to call me and tell me how much they missed me and ask me for a loan, but I was becoming more and more wiser and I don't believe a word they say.